So I'll begin this video by saying apologies for not being able to speak about Thunderbolts and give you my review sooner, but I've been away recently. I've worked pretty hard over the last few months, so I was pretty wrecked, and I decided...
I need a vacation.
Yeah, so I've actually been away in Lanzarote in the Canary Islands for the past week. So yeah, it's time to talk about Thunderbolts. I will give you my full review in the next day or so, but in the meantime, we do have to talk about its box office performance. The film has completed its first weekend in cinemas, and if we head on over to Box Office Mojo, we can see here that it has made $76 million domestically, which was pretty much what it was expected to make. That is a little less than the $88 million that Captain America Brave New World made. It is a good bit more than the, $46 million that the Marvels made. Thunderbolts also went on to make $86 million internationally. So that's a worldwide total of $162 million after one weekend. Keep in mind that studios don't receive as much of the international take at the box office as they do domestically. Nevertheless, I would expect the film to break even and even bring in a relatively tidy profit, because unlike some other recent MCU movies, this film was made on a smaller budget. I won't say it was made on a small budget, it was just made for less money, I should say, than the likes of Captain America Brave New World and the Marvels and Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania. This film cost $180 million to make. That's still a lot of money, but it's not nearly as much as some of those other movies I've mentioned. So the film stands a reasonable chance of at least being profitable and certainly bringing in its production and marketing costs. I would wager its marketing costs are about $100 million, which is in line with films of this size, typically speaking. Now, as you guys know, I was rooting for this movie. I wanted this to be a sleeper hit. I wanted this to be a surprise success. But that's not going to be the case. And it was unrealistic to think that it was going to do anything spectacular. It's not a bad movie. I think there's a lot of good aspects to it. It is, I believe it's a more coherent story and a better movie overall than Captain America Brave New World, which by itself wasn't even that terrible. I mean, it was just sort of middle of the road. As much as I did like the trailers for Thunderbolts, and I was thinking, this could be all right. I know some people are probably a bit tired of the ragtag anti-hero ensemble, the kind of Guardians of the Galaxy, Suicide Squad type trope. It's not a cliche, it's a trope, right? And there's nothing wrong with tropes. Tropes work for a reason. That's why they're used in storytelling. And I quite like the ragtag thing. I think if it's done right, it can be fantastic. And so I was fully geared towards a particular type of movie. I was receptive to what Thunderbolts could be and what they were trying to do with it. And what we ended up getting was a film that was just, again, too filled with stereotypical scenes and dialogue and too much typical Marvel humor, which this film to me, it didn't need to be like super dark or anything, right? It was already dealing with dark themes as it was, and there was nothing wrong with that by itself. What the film needed to be was more serious, because the MCU in particular, I think since Phase 2, has been repeatedly undercutting serious moments with irony and cheap humor and gags. And the constantly releasing the thematic and narrative tension in the story, and it just neuters the movie in terms of impact, because everything has to be turned into a joke. And this film needed to be more like Watchmen. If they're going to go for a grittier, slightly more violent kind of movie, there's nothing wrong with that in particular. They could have gone down the Watchmen route. That's what it needed to be. Slightly darker Avengers without being, super depressing dark. So it needed to be made a more serious movie. The cheap gags should have been cut out. And actually, I think the film could have been vastly improved in editing, potentially. And some of the stuff in this movie is a little bit heavier than usual. It definitely feels a little bit different to the average MCU movie, and that's a good thing, I think. But it just doesn't hit with the kind of impact it needed to, and I'm not sure what the reasoning was behind building a big movie, in particular at this stage of the MCU, which is now in it's come to the end of its fifth phase after several, over 3 dozen movies now in the franchise. I'm not sure what the logic was behind building an ensemble out of secondary characters, some of whom a lot of casual audiences would not be familiar with, because some of them have popped up in TV shows that people may not have seen, and because there's just so much MCU content now. And as a result of that, there's a kind of a why should I care about this character kind of feeling. Audiences might just simply not be emotionally invested in these characters. They don't know who they are. They've obviously missed, huge portions of backstory and so forth. So it was always going to be a difficult sell. It's not like there's any major superhero characters in this film. And a lot of people are not going to... I think a lot of casual audiences are not going to know who Florence Pugh's character is. They're not going to know who Yelena Belova is. She was a secondary character first introduced in Black Widow, of course, which starred Scarlett Johansson, of course, as Natasha Romanoff, a character who had died in Endgame. So Black Widow was a prequel, which was kind of odd to kill her off and then finally give Natasha Romanoff her own movie after she's dead. And so Yelena Belova appears in that, as well as David Harbour's character of Red Guardian. And if you haven't seen that film, you're not going to know these characters. That film wasn't great anyway. It was kind of meh, So to sort of build a movie off of that probably wasn't a good starting point. And then you have other characters in there like Wyatt Russell's John Walker, who first appeared in Falcon and the Winter Soldier as a temporary successor to Captain America. And you'd have to have seen that TV series in order to know who he is. Obviously, Sebastian Stan, everybody knows Bucky Barnes. And then you've got, people like... And Hannah John Kamen's character of Ava Starr, Ghost, she had a very minor role in 2018's Ant-Man and the Wasp. So that's quite a while ago. And I don't know how many people still remember that character, after all this time. Julie Louis-Dreyfus plays Valentina Allegra de Fontaine, and she's popped up a couple of times. She had a post-credit scene at the end of Black Widow. She was in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, but not many people would really know who she is. She's not as prominent or well-known as a similar character like Nick Fury. So it's just, like I say, there's just not enough name recognition, either in the cast or the characters themselves. These are superheroes and they should be, well known in terms of, brand recognition, and it's just not really there. And so I'm not really sure what the pull is to go and see Thunderbolts in the cinema. If it was a streaming movie, I'd kind of understand. It does play an important role in setting up, or at least in the post-credit scene, in setting up the next film, where there's a reference directly to Fantastic Four. But, Thunderbolts is not going to be $1 billion movie, I think, at this stage. So I don't know what the current estimates are in terms of how much it's expected to make in its final box office total worldwide. I would say maybe 500 to 600 million would be okay. It probably needs to make that anyway. But we'll see. We'll see what the drop-off is next weekend. Is it worth watching? I think so, yeah. I think it's worth watching. I don't think it's worth running to the cinema for. But then again, I don't think Disney Marvel have produced a film that's worth running to go to the cinema to see for quite some time now. So look, the apathy has definitely set in, and that is it's a real issue. I don't know how they pull it back from there. And I think they're banking now on Fantastic Four, which I also expect to not be great. I don't have any interest in seeing it. I'm not bowled over by the trailers thus far. And even if it turns out to be a good movie, I think people are just tired of this franchise at this stage. It's had its best days, and they're trying to recapture the Infinity War Endgame energy again, as we know with those two big movies, Avengers Doomsday and Avengers Secret Wars. And I don't think it'll succeed, because the key difference between Infinity War and Endgame was that they were the fulfillment of basically 10 years of story build-up, of a story, the Infinity Saga, that had taken 10 years to develop. And that's what people wanted to go and see those movies for, to see the conclusion, to see the payoff, a satisfying conclusion to the Infinity Saga. But what's the draw of going to see Avengers Doomsday and Avengers Secret Wars? Well, it's not for the story, which is going to be some sort of multiverse mess that nobody's going to be interested in, really. The draw to go to see Doomsday and Secret Wars is bringing old characters back and having a crossover with the X-Men, and Robert Downey Jr. is coming back, and, Chris Evans is going to be there. It's member berries. It's nostalgia bait. It's gimmicks. That's what Doomsday and Secret Wars are built upon. It's just desperation. It's not story. I wanted to know what was going to happen in Infinity War, because the story had been built up and built up. The Thanos saga had been built up for so many years, and it ended on a major cliffhanger. And then I wanted to know, how are they going to resolve this? I was invested in the story. But who cares what the story is for Doomsday and Secret Wars? That's not the reason why people are expected to go and see it. They're expected to pay money and go see it at the cinema because they're bringing a bunch of actors and characters back, some of whom retired at Endgame or were killed off, for example. That's the reason why. And that's not a good reason to go see a movie. I think they're in trouble here. I really do. I think they're going to spend an awful lot of money to try to jumpstart this franchise and reanimate this franchise. And it's not built around story and quality of storytelling. It's built around nostalgia. There you go. I don't think this is going to work. They needed to do a hard reboot after Endgame. The hint was in the name. But they kept the franchise on life support and continued, and that was a mistake. To me, the MCU was the Infinity Saga. It was an intrinsic part of its identity. And when that story arc was told, the MCU should have been retired. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel, hit that like button. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.